Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And 9.1 has a lot to unpack. And in this update, we're going to be covering the gear changes that are coming, more specifically tailored to PvP, but it does affect PvE, and I just want to give my own opinion on it and sort of the history of gearing in the game and what it could mean as far as an approach for the future. And is it going to be good, a net positive, or potentially a net negative overall for the game? So here, Blizzard has made a post and it says, in Shadowlands, we've been happy to see that the reintroduction of honor, conquest, and PvP vendors has been well received by players. I think this kind of goes without saying for at least PvP players. I think that it should be explored as well in PvE, and it already is somewhat through the Valor vendor, but more deterministic oriented reward structures in the game. Because whenever I think back to my most negative experiences with the reward system in WoW, it's usually related to something that was just unobtainable strictly from RNG. I don't mind some gear from RNG, but I would like to know eventually all of my time spent is going to result in the item that I'm pursuing, so that from after acquiring that item, I can pursue a high level key or a high raid parse or a high rating in PvP. Just knowing that you're going to get there at some point is a very important feeling. And without that, it has created a lot of negativity towards content in the game that I may otherwise not have had any sort of negative reception to. And I think back to something like Ashran that was added in Warlords of Draenor, and initially Ashran was well received. It was a good way to catch up your honor gear for your characters, and maybe some changes throughout it. You could critique the actual content itself. But as far as the rewards were concerned at the start, I think it was pretty positively received. But towards the end, when they introduced a trinket called the Accolade Trinket, this trinket was the best trinket for a lot of specs in the game throughout all of PvP, maybe even some PvE, probably not because of the item level scaling. But because this Accolade Trinket was only obtainable from Ashran, which wouldn't have really been a problem if it was deterministic, but it wasn't. It was a random drop, and it was once a week random drop. And I had a lot of friends and even myself try to run Ashran to get this trinket because it was so powerful and not be able to, and see the entire expansion without ever being able to get this item created a really negative outlook towards Ashran that I may not have actually otherwise had, strictly because of this reward model. And this applies to raiding as well for myself, or to Mythic Plus in Battle for Azeroth when you were trying to target a specific weapon like a Gideiku, and you just had no guarantee of it ever happening. You felt like you were holding your teammates back in other content that you wanted to play, and there was no light at the end of the tunnel other than just praying that it happened to drop. So I think RNG rewards, while they provide a thrill, right? There's a certain intensity of, oh my God, the weapon just dropped. I think in some cases, exploring more deterministic routes could actually be a net positive for the game, which we've now seen, having returned the Conquest vendor and introduced the Valor vendor from the past. But back to the post. Nonetheless, we feel that there is still room for improvement. This is good. It's not going to be the final iteration of the system. One piece of feedback we've heard repeatedly is that PvP gear needs something special for it to stand apart in PvP-specific situations. So what's happened in PvP is, in a lot of cases, Mythic Raiders will cross over, Mythic Plus players will cross over with higher item levels than, let's say, people who are just only doing PvP, whether it be from the casual level or slightly unranked, challenger range. And their item level disparity is a very big gap. And those Raiders, Mythic Plus players will kind of just throw you around, right? And they'll body you in PvP just with how big of a gap that item level is going to be. That is kind of a problem. And it's a two-pronged sword as well, because PvEers feel obligated to PvP because that gear is really good in PvE. So they feel like they need to cross over, and then they're crossing over with their gear that they've worked hard and obtained and overcome challenges to have. But then they're just bodying all the PvP players at the lower levels with that gear. So it's created it's hard to balance, right? And it goes back into the overarching philosophy of gear in the game, right? Should gear be gear? I've got a good piece of gear from high level content, regardless of the content, that makes my character powerful in all situations. This may be true if it was the case and it was a two-way street, right? Going back and forth, but oftentimes it's not going back and forth. It's usually a PvE obtained item is insanely good in PvP, but not actually that good in PvE. or an item obtained even from PvP is very good in PvE. And I'm thinking of the trinkets specifically. Some of the trinkets awarded from PvP provide so much stats that they're actually some of the best trinkets in PvE, while often in PvP you're using a Battle Master trinket instead. So that there's some crossover there, but in the past it hadn't been a two-way street, and that was BFA, for example. So if you geared up in BFA, it was almost your entire gear set was from PvE, and they've addressed that. Now my gear set is pretty much entirely PvP, and I could go over into Mythic Plus and get some of the gear from Mythic Plus, like some of the rings, I think, particularly, and sort of intermingle them a little bit, but it's not as massive of an advantage as it had been in the past, which is a significant improvement. But here, now, in an upcoming build with the Chains of Domination PTR, you will notice that all Season 2 PvP items have a plus 13 item levels in PvP. This means that in PvP situations such as Battlegrounds, Arenas, and War Mode, the power of these items will be increased by 13 item levels, and along with this, the baseline item level of these items will be reduced by 6 from where it would have otherwise been. So this is making the PvP gear the best in PvP situations, but maybe not in all cases, right? So if you were decked out in maximum mythic raid gear fighting fully casually geared random battleground gear, they're still going to have an edge over you. It's going to be 13 item levels less of an edge, which is better than nothing. If you're just jumping in and you wanted to gear up through PvP and then the raiders were crossing over, and the raiders are likely to still cross over because some of the 2400 raiding weapons, at least the hardcore raiders that really want absolutely min-maxed everything, will likely still be crossing over. Maybe not as much of like a casual. I feel like even in a casual level raid, they might cross over as well. If this arrangement had been in place during Shadowlands Season 1, Duelist gear would have had a baseline item level of 220 and would have scaled up to item level 233 in Season 1 PvP, making it comparable to the Mythic Raid gear, right? So if you're a Duelist level player, then you will get better gear than the Mythic Raid. So you've got to still be somewhat decently high if you want to compete with the Mythic Raid gear. And also, there are a lot of specific weapon bonuses that I'm noticing on the Raid gear. There's been talks of kind of set bonuses coming back to Raid gear. That does raise some concerns to me in PvP specifically, because they might trump 13 item levels of power, right? And this is the difficulty of balancing both, and where you've got to walk a fine line in this system for getting gear in PvP or PvE, because what if some of these weapon procs or bonuses end up superseding the item level differential? I guess it does ultimately end up being, is that item interesting in that content, right? Is the item crossing over from PvE providing a better gameplay experience in PvP? Then I'm somewhat okay with it. But if it's coming over and it's providing a negative impact to PvP, and I'm thinking something like tank trinkets in the past, like Zelzek's Veiled Eye trinket that just give you shields and stuff like that, I don't think that it's for the best of the game. I also think that PvP players particularly don't like only RNG gear. So if going after a raid item for a bonus or something is just only awarded randomly, and they're just infinitely looping through the raid just because they want that item to play arena, and then they'll never go back into the raid again, that's going to leave a bad taste in their mouth. It's going to leave them, at least it's going to leave me in that experience, more resentful to the content, rather than jumping into the raid for the sake of experiencing the raid or overcoming the challenges that the raid had to offer. I'm feeling forced into it to target this item, and every time it doesn't drop, I'm just getting more and more angry and frustrated that it hasn't dropped, and it's creating a negative relationship with the raid. But I could see from a participation metric standpoint that doesn't matter, right? I've done the raid. It's showing that I've done the raid, so it can look good from that aspect. But from a personal aspect, it's actually creating a negative experience. Whether the content again could be amazing, right? The raid could be awesome, but because I'm forced into that, I end up having a negative reception to it, and I think that's likely a shared feeling, which is why there's been so much positive reception to the changes to the gear system already moving forward. But as far as gear sharing between PvE and PvP, it seems like they still want a little bit of crossover. So again, like the rings, maybe some weapons, based on reading this post, which I'm fine with a little bit of the crossover. It's where you get into items that are like legendary status or previous legendary status like Valnir or Shadowmourne or Warglaves, or even accolade trinkets, get EQs. You get into this power range where it's more than just like a 3% stat min max thing. It's like that thing is the only reason that your spec can work sometimes, or this is the reason you will win versus not win. When it's that big of a gap, I start having more frustrations towards it. Also, I think that it's in a perfect world, you would have somebody who enjoys playing WoW. They like raiding, they like doing dungeons, they like doing PvP. They want to push it all to the highest level. But in terms of time spent to do that, I mean, unless you're literally Trill, right? The Windwalker who Mythic World first raids and competed in the MDI and competes in arena tournaments and all that, and maintains a high level of classic rating as well. Unless it's literally your life and that's what you want to do, which is fine if you want to do that, right? You're not going to be able to excel in any one given of those content that you may have otherwise been able to when gear is gear. So if you want to be a high mythic raid parser and you really like doing that, and that's what you want to excel in, the rewards from the raid should benefit you the most for the raid so that your time is spent improving towards that goal rather than detracting from you. It's like, I need to spend 2 hours doing some PvP or 3 hours doing some Mythic Plus now, and it's detracting from your goal of trying to get a high parse in the raid. It's the same problem for Mythic Plus players. I actually see a lot of posts from people like J.B complaining that Mythic Plus gear is still going to be inferior, and PvPers and Raiders are kind of shaking their hands like, yeah, this is a good system. Raiders don't feel like they have to PvP. PvPers don't feel like they have to raid, potentially. But again, the bonuses I'm a bit worried about. But then Mythic Plus item level is a little bit lower. And I'm not sure if Mythic Plus item level is lower. It's probably because organizing a raid of 20 people is much more challenging than organizing 5 people for a dungeon. So if the rewards were equal, players that are playing for rewards from PvE content, why would you go through all the time to get 20 people unless you really liked the raid? Maybe you did it once, but why would you do it week after week if you can get the same gear from organizing 5 people together, right? This is just a common problem for players that are only playing for rewards. You're only playing for the item. You're not playing for the group experience. You're not playing for the content experience. You're not playing for some sort of aspirations to a high parse or a high key or a high rating in PvP. You're just strictly going after the item, and you want the item, and that's all you want. I feel like they're kind of forced to do that to make PvE content that is soloable, or a smaller group of people can't reward as much as the larger group, because it's a pain in the butt. I gotta be real with you, right? Like, it's a pain in the butt. If anyone's been in a raiding guild or organized a raiding guild, getting 20 people to show up to something and to sit through it and go through it is way more challenging, regardless of just the content itself, than to get 5 people and go through it, or even less than that, for some other parts of the game. So it's so difficult to do that, right? Although now the people who want to focus on Mythic Plus, again, I bring back to the raider, right? The rating explanation that I gave. People who want to do Mythic Plus and push high keys, or whatever the format has to be for tournament play for Mythic Plus, they feel like they're detracting their time from progressing towards those achievements in their dungeons by having to spend time in the raid or having to spend time in PvP when they want to go after those goals and go after those aspirations specifically. And it's a lot of time to get into a top level raid guild, to get the top level gear that you need to get the top level pushing in the key that you would like to be doing, to also have the time in PvP to get skilled and pushed up in PvP to get that stuff to compete in the Mythic Plus dungeon content is a lot of time. And it's the same thing for PvPers. Organizing people to push really high in PvP, and then needing to raid, and then needing to do Mythic Plus, and then still pushing in the bracket that you want to. If you're not Trill, you just can't feasibly have the time to do all of this. And in some cases, I think, at least for myself, I would just become overwhelmed. Or so you'll either compete in that bracket at an incorrect level in terms of stats and power on your gear, which can prevent strategy problems, right? If you might be able to kill a pack of mobs in a dungeon faster if you had gotten that item from the raid, or if you had been able to get a target to 0% in PvP, they're otherwise 5% because of this gear difference. Your strategies are just shifted and skewed so dramatically. So it comes back into like an overarching philosophical view of the game and what it should be. Should the players who are pursuing these goals of high parses, high keys, high PvP ratings, have gear systems that are specifically tailored to their modes. So you have PvP gear that's the best in PvP, dungeon gear that's the best in dungeons, raid gear that's the best in raid, or should it just be gear is gear? You go to any of the content in the game and you get gear, and that gear is strong in all content of the game, you would hope. It's a two-way street. But it's so hard and challenging to have it be like that. And then the players who are at the top level, or not even at the top level, they might even just be playing at a lower rating level or more inexperienced, but they want to go towards those goals, just don't have the time. They honestly just don't have the time to do it. And I mean, you could say, well, it's WoW, don't play WoW then. And that's, I guess that's a fine argument, right? If that's the view that you want to have on it, is WoW, gear is gear. You do all of the stuff. It is literally your life. If you want to compete even in any one given part of this game, you need to compete at the highest level in all of the parts of the game to get the gear to be able to then focus on the one. I like encouraging some crossover, right? Like to go try the raid, like, oh, this ring could be good. I'm going to go try the raid I'm going to go try some dungeons, or I'm going to try some PvP and have some crossover. But I ultimately want the content to hold my community in the game mode, right? Like I want people that are like, I'm excited to PvP, I'm going to jump into PvP and play some PvP, or I'm excited for the raid and I'm going to jump into the raid because I want to do the raid, and I'm excited to do dungeons because I want to go in the dungeon and fight the mechanics, whatever it is specifically that's intrinsic to the game mode, right? That's for me. That's what I would ultimately want. I don't want somebody that's coming into PvP. They're like, I don't want to be here. I just need my 2400 weapon for raid. They don't want to be there. Then they're gone as soon as they get it. I don't really want that player, because that player is just, one, becoming resentful of the content. It's just going to leave, and I'm not going to have them to play with anymore in the long run. So it feels artificially contrived to make that player do that. So I'm hoping that with this shift, everybody is going, with this shift, it seems like they're going more towards having specific gear modes for the different types of content in the game. And as a result, I'm hoping this means that PvP players will feel most powerful in their PvP gear. Raid people will feel most powerful in their raid gear in raid. And I think dungeon people are still somewhat left out, at least from what I've read on Twitter from some of the players who may not be. I feel like there's a little bit more crossover between raiding and dungeons than there is PvP and PvE. So maybe this isn't seen as much of an issue because it's just like PvE is PvE and it's kind of like bundled together. And I feel like a lot of, I don't want to say most of, but a lot of the Mythic Raiders do also do Mythic Plus, and it's kind of mingled together a bit. But it's not true for all of them. There are some people who really do only want to focus on Mythic Plus, but are feeling forced to raid or forced to PvP. And it just goes back to the time thing. But regardless, what do you think? I know this has been a little bit of a long rant going into this, but I wanted to review it. I think that it's going to have some interesting effects, but I've got some concerns as well. And we've already gone over them. Are these bonuses in the raid going to be better than this 13 item level bump? Does this also mean that we can accelerate honor and conquest gains again? Because if 9.1 or season 2, assuming that season 2 is as long as season 1, I would really like some catch-up mechanics similar to Warlords of Draenor. This is a scaling system like Warlords of Draenor, but there's no speaking of catch-up mechanics to help alts later on to get their honor caps or get their conquest caps, and I would really like that. And I hope that by this gear being a lower item level in PvE, they can add those catch-up mechanics, because one of the main problems of adding a catch-up mechanic currently would be that if I can get all my conquests in a week, then that is the best gear to get in the game when you ding max level. You ding max level and queue some RBGs at low rating and get that gear to get into raid, right? And that, I can see that being a problem for the people who want to raid, because it's like, I want to focus on the raids and getting better at my rotation, which is almost dramatically different through talent builds and conduits and all this stuff. Like, as much as WoW is WoW, you are playing a very different loadout of your character in any given part of the game, dependent on the group size or monster group size or player group size. You're going to be playing a pretty dramatically different experience, sometimes even rotationally. There's some abilities you don't use in PvP, some abilities you don't use in PvE, and it's just because it's such a different game. All of these little modes in the game are such a different game from each other, but it really depends on your approach to it, right? Is WoW WoW, or is WoW a subset of mini games inside of the umbrella of WoW? and what is the best way to encourage everybody to play more and to stay and to enjoy their experience. And I think it's to focus on the intrinsic value. While these extrinsic systems are important for motivation, the intrinsic value of I'm going to get that boss kill, or I'm going to push to a higher level parse, or get a keystone higher, or get my rating higher in PvP together is more valuable long term. At least to me, it's more valuable. And that's like the core essence of keeping people in the game, and those people will get more people to play so they can have that experience. So for me, that's what I want ultimately. And I think that this approach is getting closer to that, but potentially needs more tweaks, and one of those would be the catch-up mechanic. But aside from that, thank you very much for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel if you like this type of content, you like these types of updates, as I'm trying to keep you in the know and the now when it comes to Shadowlands. And I've got some TVC content as well on the burner. But until next time, I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.